Could you state your name and spell your last name, please?
Brooke Karrington, Karrington.
How are you employed?
I am a principal managing partner at Carrington Financial Forensics.
Is this a company that you started?
Yes, it is.
And when did you do that?
Officially in, I think, 2012 when I registered that business, but I'd been doing this for about 35 years.
What's the nature of your business?
I look at, most of the casework I get is forensic accounting, and most of the casework is cases where there are allegations of fraud or missing or misappropriated funds, tracing of bank transactions, and casework like that.
And how long have you been doing that?
35 years next month.
Do you have an undergraduate degree?
I do.
What is it in?
It's in English.
And what about a graduate degree?
I have an MBA.
Do you have any certifications or other degrees?
Yes, I am a certified fraud examiner. I also am certified in anti-money laundering transactions. I am also working towards certification in blockchain and cryptocurrency.
So this is probably going to be a lot, but in your 35 years of forensic accounting, how many cases have you worked on?
A couple of years ago, I had to quantify that, and at that time, it was about 4,600.
So probably more now.
More now.
Okay. Have you provided testimony in financial crimes cases?
Yes, I have.
How often?
A handful of times per year, I would say.
Okay. How did you first get involved in this case?
I was originally contacted by the investigator for the estate of Eric Richins.
And who's that?
Todd Gabler.
Okay. And why did he contact you, or what was his reason for contacting you?
Mr. Gabler and I have been acquaintances and colleagues for 30 years, and he expressed to me that I have a skill set that he knows nothing about. So.
Okay. And who hired you?
The estate hired me initially.
Okay. And at some point, were you retained by the Summit County Attorney's Office?
Yes.
When was that?
I believe it was May 31st of this year, just a couple weeks ago.
Okay. So as part of your being hired by the estate and being retained by the Summit County Attorney's Office, have you reviewed any documents that are relevant in this case?
Yes.
What have you reviewed?
I've reviewed bank account statements, tax return documents, real property records, specifically trust deeds and warranty deeds, reconveyances. I've also reviewed insurance policy documents, tax information.
Okay. Specifically with respect to the defendant, were you able to determine whether or not she owns any businesses?
Yes.
What business does she?
She owns several businesses, and the most relevant one to this case, I believe, is Richins Realty LLC.
Okay. What kind of business is that?
It's in the realty business, real estate business, and I understand she flips homes, but she also acts as a realtor representing people who are purchasing homes.
Okay. And when did she start this business?
It was registered in Utah in April of 2019.
All right. Were you able to find information regarding the defendant's buying and selling of homes?
Yes.
And how did you find that information out?
Those documents are typically recorded, and they are public documents, and they're typically recorded at counties' recorder offices. There's also information along that line at the assessor offices, and each state has a little bit different process of doing them. Most of them do it the same way that Utah does, which is through the county recorder.
Okay. I'm going to show you, if I may approach you, what's been marked as State's Exhibit 2. You recognize that?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a schedule that I prepared. I use the term schedule to talk about my work product and the analysis and how I depict it. So this is a chronology of the real properties that I was able to identify attached to either Kouri personal, Ms. Richins personally, or through her company.
Okay. Does it show a timeline of acquisitions that she has made?
Yes. And I should underscore this is a timeline that they were acquired.
Okay.
So just this is the front end of her ownership.
Okay. And in 2019, and this is when her business was started, is that correct?
That's correct.
How many homes so far have you been able to tell whether or not were acquired by the defendant?
In 2019?
Yes.
In 2019, I have two properties listed. One of them is the home that they were living in, and that's when the HELOC was taken out. And the other one is a different property. So I've listed 2 there.
And you've listed an amount of trust deeds for 2019, is that right?
That's correct.
Can you explain what those are?
Trust deeds are deeds that are recorded at the county recorder's office, and they are memorializing or documenting an obligation or an encumbrance on a property. So this would represent that there's a loan for a certain amount, and that's expressed and documented in a trust deed.
Okay. And how much money, I guess, in trust deeds, or what was the amount of the trust deeds in 2019?
Those 2 trust deeds total $471,210.48.
And you've done that for each year, 2020 and 2021 as well, right?
That's correct.
And what was the amount in 2020 of trust deeds?
2020 was $2,069,280.
On how many properties?
On 5.
Okay. And 2021, what was the amount of trust deeds and that the defendant acquired?
The amount there is $6,260,458
On how many properties?
on 13.
Do you find this significant?
Yes.
And why?
On a positive note, it depicts that the business was growing and she was actively acquiring properties. I think it's noteworthy, and it's an indication that things were growing quite significantly, and sometimes that is problematic.
And why is it problematic?
Well, it's kind of a basic thing like in business school. Growth too fast, too strong, too robustly is challenging for a business.
Were you able to determine at the end of 2021 how much the defendant was obligated on those debts, those $6 million debts? And actually explain to me the difference. What does obligated on a debt mean?
That's a very important question and a very important point to understand here. I don't have access at this point to the documents that tell me the terms of these loans. So I don't know what the interest rate is of these loans. I don't know the terms that she's agreed to for these loans. I don't know what payment is required on these loans. What I do know is these are what we colloquially call hard money lenders. And I do know on some of these what these lenders do require, and it's in the neighborhood of 12 to 15%. These are not conventional loans where there's a 30-year payment amortization. These are typically short-term loans, and people in the house flipping business, the fix and flip business, typically are turning those over a little more quickly, so they don't need a 30-year loan. They need a shorter term loan. So I understand what she's obligated on, but I do not know what the balance is at the end of particular time period.
I see. You need more information to get to make that determination, is that right?
That's correct. And that would be the loan documents themselves, the promissory notes, and the ledgers from the lenders to show what payments were or were not made and when were they made, how the interest was calculated and accrued, what other fees. Typically, these lenders have significant loan origination fees, and if payments are late, then the interest rate is higher on the late payment. There are perhaps default fees, things like that.
Okay. So do you have a rough estimate on what she was obligated to at the end of 2021?
Yes.
And what's that?
The end of 2021
Yes.
was a little over $4 million.
Okay. And you don't know if that's you don't know what she had paid back, but you know that was what at that point she was obligated.
That's what she was obligated on these properties that she still owned at that time. And this is, I believe I've done a pretty good job looking for properties, but there may be others that I don't know about.
Okay. Were you able to look at bank accounts that belonged to the defendant?
Yes.
And what is servicing a debt? What does that mean?
That would be a term that would explain that there's a debt outstanding, and servicing a debt would be the payments on that debt. So if I have a credit card and I have a monthly payment, or I have a balance due, my payment toward that credit card is called servicing my debt.
Okay. And were you able to determine how much debt the defendant was servicing in December of 2021, for instance?
Yes.
How much was that?
The debt payments?
Yes.
The debt payments were about $252,000 in that month.
Were you able to do?
The debt payments that she made in December of 2021, there were 94 payments, And those 94 payments total $252,000.
Is there anything that you found significant about those debt payments?
Yes.
What was that?
They were not to 94 individual entities. Some of them were weekly payments. For example, I know that she has an outstanding debt during that time of $5,438 that was required to be paid weekly on a debt. She has a $600 payment that is made daily for a period of time during December. And the payees on most of those debts, the large majority of those debts are hard money lenders. Some of them are credit cards.
And this was in a particular account you looked at,
That's
correct?
just in one account, yes.
And do you remember what account that was?
That's the account 6577.
Okay. Were you able to determine if she was current on her debt payments that were coming out of 6577? Did I say that number correct? Yes.
Yes, she did. I know of one account that she has that had sued her, and they filed suit in New York in December 9th of 2021.
Okay. But, to ask you about that, I will ask you about that one in a minute. But
Okay.
were you able to look at the bank account and determine whether or not she was current on her payments or whether her payments were going through correctly?
I can't tell you if she was current on her payments. I can say about those payments that several of them did not clear the bank. And
Why was that?
she was in the negative in that account for a good part of that month. She was $22,000 in the hole for a good part of that month.
So you noticed that, at least for that account in that month, that some of the payments to the hard money lenders were not going through?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you notice any charges for overdraft fees or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what did you notice about that?
They were $25 each, and sorry, I don't recall what the cumulative number is for that, but there were dozens.
Okay. Now I want to ask you about this. You said that there was a lawsuit that you were familiar with out of New York.
Yes.
Can you explain what you found out about that?
So in that case, they did file the agreement. And so from that, it's apparent that Ms. Richins used receivables of $87,000, and receivables are her potential revenue. It's work that she's performed or earned, and she's expecting to be paid this money to her company as revenues. So that's $87,000 that's stated in the case, in the document that they filed with it. And that agreement also says that she's borrowing $60,000 against that $87,000 at 15%. And that document also spells out the terms of the agreement that she's to make weekly payments of $5,438 until that debt is paid.
And do you know why this lawsuit was brought, or what the documents indicate about why the lawsuit was brought?
According to the complaint, which is the other side's version of what happened, that she made payments of about $21,000. So that would be a little shy of 4 payments. And then after that, she defaulted.
Okay. And when was that lawsuit filed?
December 9th, 2021.
So we talked a little bit about the bank accounts, at least do you know where the Richins Realty bank account, what the bank is?
Where they banked?
Where they banked?
Yes.
What is that?
America First Credit Union.
Okay. And were there any other America First Credit Union accounts that you were able to look at?
Yes.
And when were you able to look at those?
Over this past weekend.
Okay. How many accounts did you get access to?
Probably about 11 or 12.
Okay. Were some significant?
Yes.
Or some not?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask you specifically about each of these in order, or not each of them, but a couple of them in order. There's the 6577, is that right?
That's correct.
What was, and that was the Kouri Richins Realty, right?
That's primarily, that is the name of the account, and that's, as far as I can tell, that's primarily where the transactions were housed.
And you said primarily the hard money lending payments?
Primarily there.
Okay. And that one ended up in about negative 2,200 at the end of 2021.
22,000.
22,000. Did you look at 2204?
Yes.
What primarily was that?
That's the joint account, so we would call that a personal account. It's a joint account. It's held jointly with Eric and Kouri Richins.
Anything stand out in that account to you?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, I it's important to me to look at kind of a runway of the account leading up to a significant time period, because it's important to understand the nature of an account. And so I've gone back to 2020, long before the review period that's relevant specifically in this case, or that is people are concerned about in this case, to understand what the nature is and what's the character of that account. How is it used and what's typical for a particular account holder. And that's going to be different for every person and every business. And so I looked at this account, and typically it is the account that is used to pay credit cards and kids' expenses and family expenses and things like that.
Okay. Anything else stand out as you reviewed the account?
Yes. As we get closer to the time period that's relevant here, which is like the months leading up to Eric's death, I would term that, and then what happened after. There are transfers between accounts and amongst accounts. I can see, Eric's payroll coming into that account. I can see there are some deposits or transfers, I guess I should say, from Kouri Richins Realty, payments going back to Kouri Richins Realty. There's a marked increase in the number of transactions that occur in that account and all of the accounts.
Okay. So you actually see an increase of money moving around in that account, say late 2021 and up until Eric's death.
That's correct, yes.
Why is that significant? Why do you find that significant?
Well, I'm looking for what's typical or what makes sense. And so I'm looking at, what's happening in the business account, and does that influence what happens in the personal account, along with what is happening in the acquisition of properties and how those move together. And so there's this kind of noteworthy crescendo that happens in the months leading up to Eric's death. There are indicators of an increase of chaos and loss of control and larger amounts of money moving all around the accounts.
In a positive way or a negative way?
It feels haphazard. There's not a pattern. There's not a practice that there had been a little bit earlier in my review. And there are transactions that don't clear when there's, money is moving around just to cover transactions.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you about those transactions that don't clear in a minute, but I'm going to go to ask you about account 5244. Are you familiar with that account?
Yes.
What is that account?
That is also a personal account. That was opened in 2013, and the header on the bank statement has Kouri's name, but the signature card, and until I looked at the signature card, I thought that was just Kouri's account, but the signature card does have Eric and Kouri as joint holders.
And what is that? What do you believe that's primarily focused when you review of that?
I thought that was a business account.
Okay. Is that what you continue to think? I mean,
it's technically a personal account.
Okay.
According to America First, that's a personal account, but it is used as a business account.
And why do you say that?
Because of the transactions that are contained within the account.
What kind of transactions are they?
There are some payments for the loans on these properties. There are expenses that I would think would be typical of a business rather than personal. But there are some personal expenses there. I'm not saying that to be prejudicial or negative or anything. It is what it is.
Okay. Are there any credit card payments coming out of that account?
Yes.
How many credit card, or what's the amount of credit card payments coming out of that account?
I didn't quantify that.
Okay. So at the end of, did you review the bank statement for that account, the 5244, for the end of 2021?
Yes.
What was the status of the account then?
That was also in the negative. It was a negative about $1,100, $1,700, something like that.
Was there a line of credit?
Yes, there was.
How much was the line of credit?
$3,200.
And what was the status of the line of credit?
And that was exceeded. Okay. That was tapped out.
Okay. So you mentioned some, I guess, transactions that did not clear. Is that how you put that?
That I did, yes.
Okay. And where did those, in what accounts were there transactions that did not clear? Do you remember?
I know the 6577 account, 5244 account. The 5244 is the one we've just been talking about. Mm-hmm. The 2204 account is the personal account, the joint personal account. And that also had a lot of money moving in and out and did have some transactions that did not clear.
So I'm going to direct your attention to a transaction that occurred on October 13th of 2021. Do you remember looking at that, where there was a check coming in from a credit union?
October 23rd of 2021?
13th.
October, for what amount?
For $4,000.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me, and that was into 6577, is that right?
I believe so. Are we talking about 2021?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was from Penn Fed. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me about that, what you recall about that transaction?
Penn Fed Credit Union is a credit union where Kouri Richins has accounts and Eric does not. And that becomes a significant issue later. But that check was deposited into the account and then it was returned unpaid.
And do you recall if there were any transactions made out of the account between the time the check was deposited and it came back unpaid?
I recall that there were transactions, yes.
Okay. And there was another couple of checks were deposited in November 12th of 2021 that did not clear. Do you remember those?
I remember that there were checks, yes.
Okay. And after those checks were deposited, do you remember if there were any payments made out of the account before it came back unpaid? Sorry.
The same is true, yes.
And do you remember who those were transferred to, or where they were transferred?
I don't recall specifically, no.
Okay. But there was money transferred out between the time the check was deposited that didn't clear and the time.
That's correct.
Okay. And then in December 23rd of 2021, do you recall any checks that were deposited, a check for $10,000 from the Navy Federal Credit Union?
Yes.
And what happened to that check?
That did not clear as well.
Okay. And checks take a while not to clear, right? Is that right? So the check is deposited, it's credited to your account, but there's some time in between the credit and the coming back not cleared. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. But it depends on the relationships between those financial institutions. Sometimes they'll clear overnight. Sometimes they'll take a few days.
And these seem to take about 4 or 5 days. Would that be?
That's
right?
correct. Okay. I remember that there were two that did not clear, and they both came from Ms. Richins' Navy Federal Credit Union account.
So these were checks written by the defendant and on the Navy Federal Credit Union account and deposited into her America First credit.
That's correct.
That didn't. Was there money between the time that the check was deposited and the time it came back as unpaid? Were there any transactions out of that 6577 account?
Yes, there were.
And what were they?
I don't recall.
Okay. But there was a time when the money was moved out of those accounts.
That's correct.
Okay. In 6577, do you recall, I know you testified that it was overdrawn at the end of the year. Do you recall if it was overdrawn prior to Eric's death?
I do. I don't remember the amount, but it was, again.
Overdrawn?
Yes.
Do you, and again, I want to ask you about go back to 5244.
Yes,
and I
so I think we can move on from the accounts.
Okay. Let me ask you about the life insurance policies. Are you familiar with life insurance policies
Yes.
on Eric's life?
Yes.
How many life insurance policies were there on Eric's life at the time of his death?
I believe there were 6.
Okay. And what were they? Can you explain what the life insurance policies were?
Yes. The first was through Minnesota Life for $347,000, and that was what is typically called a home mortgage policy, in which if the insured passes away, the home's paid off, and they write it at the amount of what the loan balance was at the time the policy is taken out. And so whatever the loan is at the time of death, I believe that loan is like 72%. They'll pay 72% of the outstanding loan. And so that one was paid.
Okay. And
then there's a life insurance policy that Eric and his business partner had on each other, basically, and that's in coordination with a buy-sell agreement on their business. And so if one of them passes away, the other would be the beneficiary of that life insurance policy.
so let me just ask you about that instead of going through one at a time. How, besides the life insurance policy that was on Eric's business, what was the amount of money that Eric's life was insured for at the time of his death?
About $1.2 million, aside from the business buy-sell policy.
And are you familiar with any attempt to change the beneficiary of the business policy?
I'm aware that is the report, yes.
And what was the report?
That on New Year's Day of 2022, that in New York Life's online portal, someone had logged in and had changed the beneficiaries on that policy
To
to Kouri Richins.
And that was changed back, as far as you know? It had been changed back at the time of Eric's death?
That's my understanding, yes.
Do you know how much money the defendant got in insurance payouts?
$1.3 million, a little bit more than that, $1.3 million in June of 2022.
Okay. Can I just have a minute, Your Honor?
Of course.
I have a couple more questions, Your Honor. Were you able to review the PenFed accounts at any time?
Yes.
Do you recall if there was any money in those accounts?
For most of the time, I reviewed a little bit over a year, I believe. Most of the time it had $5 in it.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I'm going to be really quick because
Well, this takes what it takes.
Okay.
They're on notice that I'm otherwise engaged now.
Okay, I need it. Ms. Karrington, a couple of questions. Want to talk about, pursuant to your testimony, you've been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
And you look at investment type businesses as well as personal finances, correct?
That's correct.
The course of your review of things. And you said that Kouri Richins Realty was essentially flipping homes, correct? As a business.
That's my understanding from what's publicly available.
And in your experience, that type of a business model is essentially investment properties that you don't own very long and then you resell, correct?
Yes.
So within the framework of that, it would not be uncommon or uncharacteristic to have these hard money lenders as a part of that type of business model, correct?
Yes, and that I did say that earlier, that's typical.
Right,
Yes.
we wouldn't go get conventional home loans for a home we're going to own for, 6 months, we hope, correct?
You could. That would be a lot lower interest rate. Even though it had a longer repayment period, someone could get a conventional loan to do that.
It would be hard to continue to get conventional loans, I would assume, when you're buying multiple properties, correct?
I don't know the answer to that. What I will say is it's very typical for someone in this industry that Ms. Richins is in to get hard money lenders.
So what she was doing was typical for the industry.
I would say yes.
Okay. And you created this schedule of homes. Did you also look at when those homes sold?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you correlate those payments?
Correlate.
Like, were you able to see what the homes sold for?
I have been able to see many of them what they sold for.
Okay. So, and then if you look at those, she only still owns a handful of those, correct? Like 4, maybe.
I'm sorry, what?
She only still currently owns just a small handful of those homes, correct?
I think she still owns about 6 or 8.
So she owns the ones on Canyons Resort Drive that are rental properties.
That's correct.
Okay. And she owns the Saratoga Springs house.
Yes.
Okay. And
She still owns the condo in B Street in Salt Lake City.
correct, in the Heber City.
Yes, she does. It's under joint tenancy, and K. Richins Realty is still on the title on that.
And were you able to see on any of these hard money loans if she'd partnered with anyone on them? And it's not just a hard money loan, but if there were any partnership.
The trust deeds do not indicate a partnership.
Okay, so you wouldn't known if there was some other partnership that existed on these.
Yes, that would be reflected in the trust deed, and I did not see any partnership on any of them.
Were you able to see what the balance in the 2204 account as part of your review of
At what time period?
at any time period? Did you look at the 2204?
I did.
as well? And although there were fluctuations in her business account, that account always had sufficient funds in it, correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. There was a period of time where it did not.
There are periods of time. Yes.
And you also said that Eric was on this 5244 account that was being used for essentially business type stuff. And that was Kouri's business, not Eric's. Is that correct?
You're asking me a couple of things.
Okay, sorry, I'll slow down. He's
That's
on
okay.
the
No, it's
account.
fine. It's fine. He's on the signature card. So when an account is opened, he signed as an authorized signer. She signed as an authorized signer.
Okay. So he would have, as an authorized signer, he would have access if he wanted to go review what that account was doing, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
That all depends on how it's set up with the online access. Just because someone's an authorized signer doesn't mean that they can come in and walk into the bank and get any information they want.
Were you able to tell in this case?
Well, as I said, the bank statement does not say Eric and Kouri Richins. It says Kouri Richins. And looking at the transactions in the account before I looked at the signature card, it looked very much like a business account that Kouri would have.
Okay. And are you aware that Eric was in the stonemasonry business, correct?
That's correct.
And so he was, on some level, assisting her in the remodel or cleanup of some of these homes, correct?
That is not how I would term it.
I'm not saying financially. Are you aware that he was doing work on these homes?
I'm aware of one instance on the Franson Lane home in which he and Cody contributed about $133,000 toward the completion of the home, and my understanding is different than how you're portraying.
Okay.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you.